Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is I, your host, Lateral, aka Lateral FF on the Twitter, aka the proud, I don't know if recipient's quite the right term, the proud owner of a week off from Twitter, which was, I have to say, an interesting experience, a nice experience. It's been fun to be back. I've definitely missed all you guys, but it was certainly exciting not to be checking every 10 minutes to see what the latest on AJ Dillon's quads were, or Mike Davis's quads, or apparently Gio Bernard's quads, or any running back's quads. And I know that the fantasy footballers beat me to this joke, but it's like they are running backs. Perhaps they have good leg muscles. Who knew? But as you can tell, we're back. We're live. It's a blast to be here. But I have to say, my brief time back on to fantasy Twitter this week, the one thing that I've noticed, the one thing that I think is a little important to keep in mind is in a thread, be constructive, add something to the conversation. You may be right. It may be very tough to get you off of where you are, what your position is, but you should at least be open to the idea that you missed something or you don't have all the, like, there is so much data, so much film, so much content to consume to get a full picture on these guys. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to get everything right. Nobody gets everything right. Like, we're getting half of it right if we're good. Like, I think that perspective needs to be kept in mind. So, like, if you're going to hop on a thread and try and argue your point, like, at least be open to the other side of things, being open to like new data coming in, and provide a constructive counterpoint if you don't agree with that new data, which is totally reasonable, totally fair. But like, the second you go, you aren't going to convince me anyway, then it's like, well, what was the point of like the past 20 minutes? Anyway, rants like that, if that is your sort of thing, you can get from the Lateral when we drop our flagship podcast. That's right. Herms and I, we're bringing this show to the Spotify, to the Apple Podcasts, to wherever else podcasts are sold. Sold? Is that the right term? But the Lateral is going to have a flagship podcast, and that is going to be coming next Tuesday. It's going to be awesome. We're going to record it on Tuesday, and we're going to drop it on Wednesday. That's a pattern we're going to try and keep going, just because game's not on Monday, so recording on Tuesday makes a lot of sense. We're only going to put out one episode a week. It'll be me and Herms from the Lateral. We're going to be talking about some stuff that's grinded our gears, some stuff that's like the biggest story in our opinion, and then the goal is also going to be to get into like the aspect of playing the game. There's so many people that can talk about like, oh, well, what does this thing that happened mean? Like, you know, things like that. But I think, you know, it's important to also get into why we play the game, how we play the game, what strategies work, what strategies don't work, what should you be looking at as you're starting your journey into the fantasy world. So we're definitely going to get into the nuts and bolts every week. It'll be about an hour-long podcast. Should be a lot of fun. And if you pay attention, if you catch that lead up to that first episode, we're taking some mailbag segment. You know, we're doing a mailbag segment every episode. We're taking some questions from you, the listeners, the viewers. And one of you is probably going to be the lucky recipient of a Scott Fishbowl entry. That's right. We have one spot to give away. And in order to get it, you got to submit a mailbag question to us, the Lateral. You can DM us on Twitter. Hell, you can DM me on Twitter. If you get in contact with us with a question, we will make sure that you are in the running for that Scott Fishbowl spot. So pay attention to that, and pay attention to our next guest. My first guest, it is Austin Reed from the Dynasty Nerds. What's going on, man? You are muted, good sir.
I am definitely muted. Thank you.
There we go.
Hey, how are you doing, man?
I can't get, well, I would say I can't complain, but I think I just spent about 3 minutes complaining. So I can complain, but I'm also pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for the show. Thanks for having me on. I know the last time we talked, we were actually meeting on the draft night, and that was a fun night. You did an excellent show, so I was super happy to be back. You ran a good show, and that was like a gauntlet, right?
That was an absolute whirlwind. In case anyone here missed that extravaganza, we had like, I think at least a dozen guests, if not more. We did the entire first round of the draft. I couldn't have done it with everyone that showed up. It was absolutely insane. There's no way in hell I'm not doing it next year. Like, that was a total blast. And it was great to have you on.
Yeah.
It was like
and I
great to
definitely want
watch
to be
the
there
madness
next year.
unfold.
Yeah,
well, I'm sure
I
we'll
definitely
have
want
you
to be
back.
there next year for sure.
I'm sure we'll have you back, but I'm glad that we could have you on tonight.
Yeah.
I'm meaning to do it. So I'm going to ask you the same question I lead off with all our first-time guests. How did you get started in playing fantasy sports? What's your first experience? Be it football, which is what we talk about here. But if you had a first experience with a different sport, I'm open to that too. See what you got.
Yeah, so it was with football. Gosh, I've probably been 11, 12 or more years now that I started playing redraft. I found that I was pretty good at doing redraft and got kind of bored with it and decided, all right, I'm going to try my hand in some dynasty. So I hopped into some dynasty stuff, and man, it's been awesome. It's been such a fun experience ever since. So probably about 12 years doing fantasy sports, mostly focused on football. I've done some basketball. I tried my hand once in baseball. Wasn't really for me, but basketball is pretty fun. But football's where it's at, man.
So you're a Chiefs guy, then are you also a Royals fan? Just curious when we're talking some baseball.
No, it's kind of funny. So I'm located in Oklahoma City. So like I'm a huge Rangers fan myself. I don't mind the Royals as like sort of my second favorite team that I'll follow and things, but I follow the Rangers pretty closely, even though they're pretty terrible right now.
I'm an O's fan, man. We've been pretty terrible for a while.
And the Chiefs are my team because that's where my family, like I have a lot of family from Missouri. Gotcha. And then, man, it's been miserable being a Chiefs fan for so long. And now I'm accused on a regular basis of being the bandwagon fan, and it's great. I love it.
As a Niners fan, I only hate you like just a little.
That's all right.
So how did you get into, so like with your first, do you remember your first championship, your first like, oh shit moment? Like what is your first memory of fantasy sports that really stands out? I'm curious.
It was a league breaker. Yeah. So I was in a work league with some friends and family and things like that. And I didn't really know anybody in the league. It was like one of my first times in this particular league. And I drafted a pretty good team. And man, I just remember like I drafted Gronk and Jimmy Graham like in their peak years when they were like peak top two
good
guys.
One. Yeah.
And then I think this was again redraft where you play with like team defense. Sure. And so we had like Seattle's defense or maybe it was Baltimore's, one of those two. It was like just the best defense you could possibly have. And then I think like that year I had, oh my gosh, like I just had so many good guys. I can't even remember. Like it's been so long. It's so funny, like how it goes in cycles. Like I remember my quarterbacks. I had Tom Brady. I had like Demaryius Thomas and his
probably
prime.
Spent an early draft pick on at that point.
Okay, so this is what happened. So my quarterbacks at that time were Tony Romo was one, and Andrew Luck was the other. And so I went into a trade and I was a loaded team. And then I went into a trade with a depleted team. And I was like, okay, here's the guys I'm going to give you, here's the guys that I want in return. And so I said, pick a quarterback, Tony Romo or Andrew Luck, whoever you want. And I think the guy picked Romo. And he gave me Tom Brady in exchange. So to complete my team, it was like Tom Brady, Demaryius Thomas, AJ Green, Eric Decker. Jeez. And it was all like those prime years that they had. And then of course the two tight ends, best defense. It was the only year that I've gone undefeated in fantasy football and won the championship. And it was a league breaker. Everybody was mad that I made that the guy made the trade with me, but it was like one of those things that if you play fantasy sports, like that's your job. In redraft, you draft the best team, you draft the deepest team. And then when the injuries are happening, you go out and you're a shark and you go get them.
No, that's certainly the dream. And also the dream is definitely going in and being able to finally create some fancy content, being not just the guy that your friends ask about, but the guy that other people, random strangers, are willing to read what they put out. So how did you get into fantasy content creation?
Yeah, so I actually came across a guy named Dennis Bennett. He is the head guy over at Dynasty Nerds, the head editor for Dynasty Nerds. I actually found him on Twitter, and it was just kind of by happenstance. I think it was probably like 2 a.m. when I came across his post, and he was looking for some writers. And so I just, shot him an email, and I'm like, hey, I wrote before, in newspaper and high school and things, and I wrote some pretty good stuff. And I was like, man, I love fantasy sports, and I'd love to, get into writing. And he just threw an article at me. He's like, all right, I want you to tell me why Jonnu Smith is going to finish top 6 tight end. And so I'm like, okay, I can do that. And so I covered that, where he would have to land to finish top 6. That was my first article, and man, it was so fun writing that. And that's just how I got started. It just kind of happened by happenstance, but ever since then it's just taken off. So it's been a lot of fun for sure.
Awesome. And so do you have any advice for a new content creator? Like someone that's going to write their first article, put up their first YouTube video. What is the one piece of advice you would give to them?
Yeah. So when you started off the show, you actually said something that caught my attention. So there's kind of 2 parts to this. The first part is just be kind. That's the number one thing. Just be kind to people.
Solid.
And that kind of segues into the thing that you were talking about earlier. You can't always be right. That's the first thing. You can't always be right. You should go into discussions, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's however, you should be open-minded. You should trust your data, trust the data that you're crunching, trust the film you're watching, trust whatever process that you do, absolutely, and believe in what you write. I think that's the third thing would just be believe in anything you put out, believe it, and die on that hill if you have to. But at the same time, you should listen to, other people's perspectives and things, because you might, overlook something, or it just may not be something that you ever occurred to you. I don't think anybody's ever been right 100% of the time.
No,
I know
it's genuinely impossible. The best people in the industry, they're hoping to be right 60% of the time.
It's
no
when we did redraft, and you go and you read all those Matthew Berry articles, and you're like, Matthew Berry, even he comes back every week and updates. Oh, hey, here's all the guys I missed on, or every year, hey, this, here's all the guys I missed on last year. And it just happens. And being able to own that is going to do great, big things for you for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I would say it's okay to agree to disagree too. So if you have your point and then someone else has their point, you're throwing some data back and forth, and ultimately you don't totally change your mind. You can always just go, well, yeah, I think those are some good points. I'm just I'm going to have to agree to disagree on that one. And then you've both put out a lot of great content, a lot of great information. Nobody's getting angry at each other, and everyone looks good.
Yeah, for sure.
Something though that I am not going to be schooling you in, that you're going to be schooling me in, is salary cap leagues. I think this is something that not a ton of people are familiar with. I mean, we're talking about something probably beyond even your average entry-level dynasty league. This is some serious stuff. So pretend I'm a dummy. How does a salary cap league even work?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would say is I'm pretty surprised at the amount of dynasty leagues and people who do dynasties that don't have some sort of like contract or salary structure to kind of challenge the whole idea of dynasty. When I think of redraft, there's redraft and then there's keeper, and I think a lot of people do keeper. But to me, and this is just my opinion, dynasty is that thing that just separates it from all of that other stuff when you introduce contracts and salaries. So how a salary cap league works, typically you mirror the contracts that are actual NFL contracts. Okay. So players get paid the same amount in a salary cap league usually as they get paid in real life. And usually, because you're not playing with offensive line, you'll set that salary cap at somewhere around 70 or 75% of the total NFL cap.
Okay.
So I think this year we set ours because we didn't adjust for COVID. It's $138 million. So you have $138 million as your hard cap that you have to try to construct a roster with. And you do it based on actual NFL salaries of players.
Okay. That's certainly exciting. So it's totally based on whatever and so actually let's say someone gets their contract restructured in the NFL. How do you handle that then in the management of a league? Say I had been under the hard cap, but because of the restructuring, now I'm somehow over. Am I going to get punished for that? Is there going to be a leeway period where it's like, okay, you can go ahead and do what you need to do. You have a week or a day or whatever to do it. How would that get handled?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically what happens is in the off season, you have a soft cap. Okay. So you're not punished necessarily for being over the cap. So, obviously as contracts change in the off season, things like that, you've got that period where you're like, you don't have to really worry about it as much. And then about a week before the season, your hard cap kicks in. You got to really figure out, okay, what are the rosters like? What's the roster going to look like, and how am I going to make all the numbers work? And so if a contract gets restructured like during the season, like once that hard cap kicks in and a contract is restructured, because sometimes that happens. Typically the commissioners, in my experience, they don't actually update those salaries. So like whatever it is on a hard date, like that's their salary for that season, even if it works for you or against you.
Okay, that's legit. I like that a lot. So how does your roster building strategy then change in a salary cap league? Like I know like a common strategy now would be like a 0 RB, 0 wide receiver. You're going really robust with one or the other. Maybe you're not picking a quarterback till round 10. You're not picking a tight end until like the final rounds. Like, so what is the difference for you with how you build your roster for a salary cap league versus a non-salary cap league?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, the first thing is like knowing your settings. And that's just in general, like, it doesn't matter what kind of fantasy league you're in, whether it's redraft or dynasty or keeper, like whatever you're doing, salary, contract, doesn't matter. The first thing you should know anytime you join a league is what are the rules, what are the scoring settings, and what's the like best roster that I could possibly put together based on that. Because ultimately, like points are what win you the games, right? Sure. So once you've moved beyond that, and you get into the roster construction with salaries and things like that, for me, I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, what is cost versus production? And then the third part would be like, what's the market for that particular position? So it's kind of three parts. Quarterbacks are really expensive, obviously. And then you start to see like players who are paid salaries. It's pretty funny. So like Julio Jones. A lot of people really like Julio Jones in the fantasy community. He's 31 years old. He had the recent injury and everybody's like, oh, maybe he's injury prone. And then you got the people who's like, no, he's definitely not injury prone. And people go back and forth on that, of course. But in a salary cap league, it's pretty simple. He's the highest paid wide receiver in the league. His contract's terrible. Matt Ryan's the same way. And it's funny, you start to see teams like from a real NFL standpoint perspective, like their team management, like how terrible. Two teams that come to mind immediately are like the Cowboys and the Falcons. Like terrible management, terrible like contracts on their teams.
So in your drafts, do you then see like people using higher draft capital then on lower paid QBs or like rookie QBs compared to like a normal? So it's like, especially I imagine like Jalen Hurts, man, like if you were doing a startup dynasty salary cap league this year, Jalen Hurts has got to be towards the top of your list just because he's got like what, top 8 potential, not like a lock, but like, is he even getting paid $1 million?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Actually, I off the top of my head, it's maybe somewhere around there.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely not a lot. Anything you can get at that price is great. Like Burrow, I mean, he's an early first round pick, so he's getting paid a little bit more like on a rookie salary, but those guys that get drafted like later, man, they're getting paid like so small. So yeah, I mean, that definitely like rookies, small contracts, people who are on those like first rookie contracts, like their stock goes way up in a startup draft or in any league. So definitely their value is increased by that for sure.
What about guys like Taysom Hill who have huge contracts, but none of it's guaranteed? How is that handled?
Oh my gosh. I think people drafted. So we just we have a 32 team league that's 2 copy, and it's a charity league actually, which is pretty cool. And cool. We just did a startup. It was like 34 rounds. And man, I think that Taysom Hill was like totally off the board, but it was funny because I'm pretty sure like Ryan Tannehill and Aaron Rodgers were like not off the board, like at the end of the draft. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't really know. I personally would not touch Taysom Hill with that contract. And then the other thing that you have to look at too, like when you're doing a salary cap league, is not just like, okay, what's the immediate impact this year? You're also going to have to look at what's the cap hit next year. So, certain players, like you can get those players right now, like on a great deal. And then like next year, you're just going to be paying them like an insane amount of money. We do IDP. So like Chris Jones is the first one that comes to mind, of a player who's like $8 million. Okay. Defensive tackle, which is not like a high impact position for fantasy or especially IDP.
Yeah.
$8 million is kind of a lot of money when you compare it to like the overall market. But then next year it's like 26 million or something like that. It's like 25 million. It's like, just drop that person. Like there's no reason of having them on your roster. So you kind of have to like work that in as well. Like you have to have a plan. It's like, okay, I know I can't afford this person. So now I have to make sure that I have somebody behind them to replace it, or I have some kind of plan to where I can manage my roster still.
So do you find then in these salary cap leagues, the frequency of like trades and waiver moves, people getting dropped fairly easily that maybe wouldn't have gotten dropped in a non-salary cap league, maybe even at all? Like, does that increase? And then also, because this seems like it's trying to simulate more like the real NFL roster building than fantasy roster building, are you even using Fab, or are you actually going back to good old-fashioned waiver order because that's what an NFL team would be using?
And we use a combination of both. So there's a waiver order, but then there's also, we introduced the Fab as well. So you do still have to bid on players. You still have to win the bids. So it's kind of a combination of both for us. Sure. I wouldn't say that you have to do it that way. I would say you could do it either way. But yeah, you do see an increase in like trades and waivers and things like that. I think mostly during the season, you don't see as much like waiver activity, probably just about the same as you would see normally. But you definitely in the off season, you see huge like changes for sure.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring on our next guest, Rob, here in just a minute. My last question for you is, what is your number one quick piece of advice for someone who is going to enter their first salary cap league, let's say tomorrow?
Oh man, do your research and then like know what your resources and tools are. So Over the Cap is a great site. Spot Rack is a great site that you can use. You can go in and you can literally look up like individual player salaries. You can see what their cap hit is for 2021, 2022, 2023. You can see when they're going to become a free agent. Obviously, that usually means payday. So you can look at all those things, and those are definitely some big things that you'll want to consider when you're drafting your team. And then the other thing I would say is just like, don't overpay somebody just for production, like if you don't have to.
Makes a ton of sense. And let's see what our next guest has to say. We got Rob Mattox from the Fantasy Coaches. Rob, what's going on, man?
How you doing, guys? Hey, I want a quick shout out, Austin. You broke down the salary cap stuff to someone who never really embraced the salary cap stuff. You did a great job explaining what that in the IDP. I don't even want to go there. I've tried IDP one time, and I think I had a mini stroke when I was doing it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, it is great to have you here. You are a content creator for Hail Mary Football, the Fantasy Coaches, Yards for Fantasy, and King Sports over in the UK. You've been doing this for ages, but I still got to ask you, how'd you get started playing fantasy sports?
Well, hop in the DeLorean with me, and let's go back to 1990 when I was a fresh-faced 23-year-old with a mullet, an earring, and a tail, and a sweet porn stash. And I started my first real job, and I was bored to tears. And I went to a bar one weekend with my friends, and I saw this sign for franchise football. I had no idea what that was. And back then, it was Miller Lite sponsored it. It was called franchise football. They gave us some flyers to take home. And the season, actually, that was week one. So I was so taken by the premise and the idea of it that I got all my friends to work together, and we drafted 1 week into the season, and we started in week 2. So we jumped on it without any experience, without any background. And basically since then, I've just been basically a junkie for it. I can't get enough of it. And every year it is just, I'm not going to say a struggle, even though I struggle in some leagues. We all do.
Sure.
But it's a passion, and it's something that I bore my family and friends with, and even my wife has beaten me in our home league.
There you go.
And all of my children, including my dear sweet daughter Holly, are indoctrinated into the game and into the Bengals, and all the misery that entails. But that's a whole other story there.
I gotta say, I love your boy Joey Burrow. Like he is someone that I put my dynasty team on his shoulders in my first year of tanking, trusting the process. I then ended up flipping Justin Herbert for Lamar Jackson. So actually it's much less pressure on Joe Burrow now. So I got to say, first of all, the look with the mullet, the stash, the earring, like that needs to become your profile picture, like ASAP.
It was a Tasmanian devil earring, by the way.
Oh, that has to resurface somehow.
If I can find a picture, I'll put it out there.
That is fantastic. What I am also sure is fantastic is how you got started creating fantasy content. So we got the story of how you started playing fantasy or franchise football, apparently. But how did you start writing about fantasy sports?
Well, around 1999, 2000-ish, there was a site, and I'm not going to name any names because I can't specifically remember the name of the site. That's how long ago it was.
Fair.
It was a site that turned into Pro Football Talk. I can't remember the original name, but I did a guest column of a start sit, and do you remember Cecil Collins, Cecil the Diesel?
Vaguely.
Yeah, I totally propped him up that one week in that one column, and he proceeded to shit the bed, and the hate mail that I got and was just legendary. And I was married, had little kids, and back in the infancy of the internet, it was really a chore to go online and produce content because I didn't have a smartphone to be doing my research or anything like that. So
true.
It was a real chore. So I did the one column, and then I just oof, I'm not ready for this hatred. And I was way wrong with some of my calls. So I tabled that. I've always been a writer of sorts, fancy myself a writer. I have notebooks of fiction and nonfiction stuff from my life growing up and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So a couple of years ago, a friend of mine started Hail Mary Football, and he was looking for some content, and I started writing some content for him, basically because over the years, I've started with my first fantasy magazine was actually a softbound book.
Okay,
that's how long ago that was. And so the magazines over the years, I noticed that a lot of the time it's just dry content, and it's just analytics and stats, and there's no personality, there's no humor, there's no color to it. So my goal was to bring some personality and some humor, along with a little bit of analytics and some common sense, and make it more easily digestible and entertaining. Like I hated the magazines. Like the old Fanball magazine was the best. I loved it. I would laugh reading that. And then you would buy a Street and Smith or another one, and it's so dry and so boring. And I would get through it because I needed to do the research. So, and now since basically magazines are gone, the online content, you either got analytics, which is dry and hard to digest, or you got something that's written like, it almost reads like it's written by a ninth grader. And you don't trust the actual source and the statistics. I want to find somewhere in the middle. You can trust what you're reading, and you're still entertained reading it.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I think, every content creator struggles with finding that sweet blend of infotainment. How am I going to be entertaining while also making sure that I provide a good amount of information, some actionable information? Do you have any advice for a new content creator regarding what was maybe the biggest thing you learned in your first couple of attempts?
Find your voice, okay? Write from what you're thinking in your head. Don't try to sound too smart, okay? Don't use words that you wouldn't use in real life, okay? Don't try to shove too much statistics and analytics in. Don't overwhelm with numbers. Use your gut. Use your gut. Use the eyeball test. Know what you're seeing on the field, and use common sense. Don't make bold calls just for the sake of making bold calls. Don't make hot takes for the sake of hot takes. Okay? Trust what you're seeing. Trust that you know what you're seeing, and just go from there. And always proofread what you're putting out there. Don't put too much on your editor, and sound like you know what you're doing.
No, I think the proofreading is definitely important, especially for your actual published written content. Like, I will say, like, I don't check a single damn thing I throw out on Twitter. Like, if Google gets it wrong, that's on Google. It's not on me. But
Twitter's fine.
But it's like, if you're putting out like a written piece, I tell one of the contributors we have over the Lateral, Zachy, he was like wanting me to edit a piece, and I'm like going through it. I'm like, it's pretty good. One thing I'd recommend is like literally just take a break, just step back, don't think about it for a couple minutes, then come back and read it out loud. Because when I do that with my pieces, I'm just like, holy crap, this is awful. I got to like redo everything, because it's just like you'll find like you got too wordy. Like, I think getting too wordy is like something you definitely got to watch out for as a writer, because we all think we're clever.
Oh, yes.
We are sort of clever, but we'll get way too clever for our own good. So I definitely, it's like you cut out the wordiness, you make sure there's no typos, you just really like, you get a much more polished product if you give it a second pass through. So I think that's great advice, especially the bit about the wordiness. I think that cannot be stated enough.
Less is often more. Less is often more.
This is absolutely true. But let's get a little more out of you, and let's find out, how do you recognize a potential breakout candidate? So if you're like looking at the guys here from 2021, what are the things you're going to look for to spot that guy who's going to have a breakout year this year?
Okay, I'm really big on opportunity is king. Sometimes it even trumps talent. Because if you put talent in the wrong situation, then and the opportunity's not there, then you're going to get disappointing results. So a perfect example last year is David Montgomery. He's a guy. We know he's a guy. But you put him in that offense with all the carries and all the opportunity. And like perfect example, in my home league, which I've been in 25 years with the same guys, keeper league, one of my best friends traded for Montgomery the last month and a half of the season, rode him to a second place finish in the money. Even though he doesn't like him as a player, he recognized the soft schedule, jumped on him at the right time, and rode that wave. So I think opportunity is king. You look for guys who are in a position where they just takes one injury or one underperformance for a couple of weeks by the guy in front of them to jump in and take the job. Perfect example, Damian Williams in Chicago. If Montgomery struggles, Williams is a dynamic back. I've always been a fan of his. I wish he hadn't opted out last year, because I owned him 2 years ago in Dynasty with the Chiefs. I was dying to keep him last year, but then he opted out. Williams runs like every play is his last. Okay, so this is a guy who is not going to cost you much to stash as your fourth or fifth back. And if Montgomery gets dinged or doesn't perform, and Tariq Cohen, he's just a guy. He's undersized. He wasn't good 2 years ago. I'm not a Cohen guy. Never have been. I think Williams could easily produce solid low RB2 numbers if he gets the opportunity, and that's good value considering where you would get him.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that opportunity definitely a big factor as well. I would totally agree with that. Now, you mentioned David Montgomery as being a guy who kind of broke out last year because of that opportunity. And I would agree that the opportunity was a big factor there, especially the lack of Tariq Cohen. I mean, we saw the targets for Montgomery literally double in 2020, which is why I've got him far from that RB4 finish that he had. I still see him as top 24, but top 12, I'm not quite there. Are there any other examples from 2020 where you like looked at a guy and you were like, this guy's breaking out, I know it? And like, what was kind of your process on that person?
From 2020 to 2021, I would target someone like Russell Gage. If Julio Jones is like, Gage had very quiet 72 catches, almost 800 yards and 4 touchdowns last year, and he's on no one's radar. And the Falcons are likely to be a train wreck of a team. Julio is going elsewhere. if Matt Ryan throws 30 touchdown passes, are 20 of them going to go to Calvin Ridley? No, he's going to get a dozen and split the rest between Russell Gage, maybe Mike Davis, a couple of receiving touchdowns, and then Kyle Pitts.
Yeah.
And Pitts, even though he's a generational talent, he's probably not going to score more than 7 or 8 touchdowns. Rookie tight ends never do. So
sure.
I would target someone like Russell Gage who can get cheap and who could put up low end wide receiver 2 numbers.
I think that is definitely good when Russell Gage. I'm going to like kind of keep an eye on as the season goes along. I think like he showed flashes last year. He also showed a little bit of flashes of being maybe just a guy, but if they don't bring in anyone super talented to replace Julio Jones, there's no reason Russell Gage can't be the second wide receiver on that team. And even with Arthur Smith, maybe bringing down the passing volume a little compared to Dirk Cutter. I think you're definitely onto something there. So I will be very curious to see how Russell Gage plays out. Now, for a sleeper, first of all, how do you personally define a sleeper? I know that's like a contentious term within the fantasy universe.
Well, you'll have some people that will define a sleeper as someone like Mike Davis. We all know who Mike Davis is, right?
Sure.
He's giant quads. He's going to get, at this point, he's going to get most of the carries in Atlanta unless they bring in a cut down back. But I'm thinking someone like Kenny Gainwell. Okay, Kenny Gainwell, rookie. He's not. They don't have a ton of draft capital in him, but the dude was dynamic at Memphis. It's a new staff. They don't have any ties to Miles Sanders. Proving that fact is that they brought in Kerryon Johnson, and I think they're willing to give some carries and see where that goes. Gainwell, smaller guy, but Sanders is injury prone. I'm not a Miles Sanders guy.
Sure.
I actually had a bet in one of my leagues last year with a buddy, David Montgomery versus Miles Sanders, and I think we all know how that went.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm not a Sanders guy. I think if he struggles and Kerryon Johnson can't fill that role, or Jordan Howard, do we even need to talk about Jordan Howard?
I'm not particularly worried about Jordan Howard. I am a little worried about Kerryon Johnson in that I think they'll lean on him to be the number 2 until he's unhealthy. The wheels will likely roll off the train at some point, but does that happen in week 3 or in week 8 or in week 12? Because if it happens in week 3, then you've probably really hit on something there with Gainwell, who could be even better than Boston Scott was, and Boston Scott was occasionally fantasy relevant. Of course, we all know Boston Scott definition of just a guy. In fact, if the Jaguars didn't already have a bunch of wide receivers, he probably would literally be a Jag today. Though I think Houston's still looking to add some running backs to that backfield. So we'll see how that goes.
We're going to sprinkle some opportunity on this entire conversation. Going back to the first point Rob made, literally all these players that we're talking about, opportunity. Mike
Absolutely.
Davis, James Robinson. I mean, all these guys you're talking about, and the difference between those guys being just a guy and then being a guy that's like more than serviceable is opportunity.
Yeah, we're certainly not talking about Najee Harris. I don't think anyone sees Najee Harris as a sleeper. Najee Harris is going to be like at worst like top 16.
Yep.
I'm okay. As you can see, I'm not a Steeler fan.
But Herms isn't here. He's a huge one.
I'm an SEC guy, so I like Najee Harris. But all these predictions, I'm seeing him being top 10, top 15. Very possible. But what did Pittsburgh do to help that offensive line situation? They lost 2 starters and did not replace them. And their line was already bad to start with.
Yeah, for me, the thing would be James Conner was actually still basically an RB2 behind all that. And James Conner is very much just a guy. Najee Harris isn't just a guy. So I think just on sheer volume, that O-line has problems. It may be it's why I'll probably take a guy who I thought was just as talented in college, Jonathan Taylor. Like Jonathan Taylor, to me, is on a much better team, better O-line. So I'm still probably going to take Jonathan Taylor ahead of Najee Harris, even though I think they're similarly talented. And I'm pretty big on Najee, to be fair. But even then, I think the sheer amount of opportunity and the fact that there is no competition in that backfield. Like, I'm from Maryland. I went to Maryland. Anthony McFarland is not someone that should scare you. Like, let's be clear. Benny Snell is not someone that you should scare you. If he did, he already would have.
I live in Lexington, so I'm a big Benny Snell fan, and I really wanted him to take that job last year, but it's not happening.
He has been given every opportunity to take that job, and he has never taken it.
Rob, real quick, give us one thing. What's your opinion on Joe Mixon? Because I just want to know this.
Yes.
Because here's why I ask. Because we're talking about opportunity, but here's the thing: you have to throw nuance in there. Opportunity isn't just about how many carries you get; it's about the quality of carries that you get, or the quality of receptions that you get, or the quality of the team that's surrounding you, the line that you're running behind, or passing behind, or whatever. So when you're talking about quality opportunities, I think Rob, you're of the opinion that, like, with Najee Harris, you don't really care for the quality of opportunities, even though, like, nobody's challenging him for carries. And then, of course, on the opposite end of that, it's like, well, nobody's challenging him, and I don't, how much stock do you put in the quality of opportunities? So what is your opinion on Joe Mixon? Do you have that same opinion of Joe Mixon and this being your team that you do of Najee Harris?
Thanks for asking. I think Joe Mixon has potential to be a top 7 running back this year. The biggest reason being is they brought Frank Pollock back to be the run game coordinator and the offensive line coach. Joe's best year was with Frank Pollock. He thrived under Pollock. I follow Joe on all the social media platforms, and I feel like I'm pretty plugged in to the local scene here. And Mixon is happy. He's not been happy the last couple of years. This is a dude that probably could have played through that foot injury last year, but he didn't like the offensive line coach. The team was going nowhere, and he shut it down. He's happy. He's excited. Pollock is going to be creative. We drafted 3 offensive linemen that he's going to mold into the type of player that he wants, Pollock. So I feel like they're going to have a better run game. They're going to more focus on the run game. That'll take some of the pressure off Burrow. And I really feel like Mixon, I don't think he's going to come off the field very often.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
So you're not worried about the offensive line?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
I think that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of concern about that. So
I think I'm somewhere in between you two on concern about the O-line. I think I watched Joe Burrow go down because of that O-line last year, and I think a lot of those guys are returning. So I have concerns about that. However, I will say, to Rob's point, Rob is not the first person I've heard to bring up that point about Mixon getting his coach back and being very happy about it, and that likely improving things. So do I think it'll suddenly turn them into the Colts or the Niners? Probably not. Or the Cowboys? Probably not. But could it turn them into a step above what they were? Yeah, I do think it'll improve for him. I think the question with Mixon will be, the nagging injuries he had from last year. Was him taking the time off enough to completely come back from them? I think so. I'm currently projecting him to be around RB10, so I am hopeful, but we will see. All right, Rob, real quick. Any guys from 2020 that you were able to nail as a sleeper? And if so, like, what was the thought process there?
Well, in my home league, I always go young on my draft picks. If you have to give me the choice between a rookie or, like, we'll go all the way back to the day, like Steve Smith in the last days of his career, I would much rather have a rookie with unknown production than a guy who I know his ceiling. Okay.
Sure.
So last year I drafted Henry Ruggs, huge disappointment, but I also snagged Chase Claypool, and I snagged him as my wide receiver 5.
There you go.
And I snagged Brandon Ayuk as my wide receiver 4.
Love Brandon Ayuk.
And I'm holding both of them in my dynasty, so I'm very happy there. Ayuk is your consummate Swiss Army knife. They will game plan ways to get him the ball. Dude rarely gets hurt. He's smart, runs good routes. So I think my favorite guy from last year that I hit on was Brandon Ayuk.
Well, I have to say, for me personally, my favorite guy I hit on was Brandon Ayuk too. But I'm a Niners fan who literally woke up the entire apartment complex watching him hurdle that guy in the Eagles game.
The Niners ruined my childhood. You understand? Twice. The last time I cried as an adult that wasn't something family related was the Super Bowl where they broke my heart in 1990. Yeah.
Well, at that time, I was still not around, but after that, I was getting my heart broken by the Washington football team. So my Niners fandom is a bit in its infancy in comparison, but I'm excited to see what Ayuk brings to the table, and I think he is the clear wide receiver 1 on that team. So, for anyone who's listening, for anyone who's watching, do not buy into anyone telling you that Deebo Samuel is somehow the lead wide receiver.
Yes,
it's like he's good. I like him. He's the wide receiver 2 on that team. They invested less draft capital in him. Brandon Ayuk absolutely killed it, and I think is just a little more talented. He just is. So I'm very excited about Ayuk in 2021. Let's get into some guys that you are excited about in 2021. Austin, I'm actually going to start with you. Who do you think will break out in 2021? It can be a guy from any position.
Man, breakout candidates. So for me, I'm almost wondering, I'm curious to see what Amon-Ra St. Brown does with the Lions. He's a rookie. I say breakout candidate. So obviously with any rookie, we don't know what they're, when I think of breakout, I think of something that they're doing now that they weren't doing before. So on that front, that's my rookie that I would choose as the breakout rookie, or the rookie that produces more than we expect. But for somebody who's going to break out that we didn't see coming, I'm going to say Josh Reynolds, number 2 wide receiver in Tennessee.
Interesting.
Opportunity. We talk about opportunity. This is a guy that's been in the league for a while. This isn't a guy who just was around and he's always just been. Yeah, it seems like he's just a guy, but you don't stay in the league and you don't work your way into the rotation the way that he did in LA with zero talent at all. So I'm kind of curious to see how he might do as the number 2 in Tennessee. Not that the passing game is real great. It's really balanced. I say balanced. It's run heavy offense more than it is pass.
Sure.
But yeah, he's going to get a ton of opportunity this year. And I'm curious to see what he's able to do with that.
I like it. And I know Herms will like it if you're correct, because he's got a lot of Josh Reynolds stock. Rob, what about you? Who do you think will break out in 2021? Doesn't have to be a rookie, can be a vet, any position. Just who's your guy?
Well, let me just say Austin stole one of my guys. I was banging the drum hard for Josh Reynolds to come to Cincinnati. The dude never misses games. He's got decent enough speed. He's smart, runs good routes. So, yeah, that's a good call there. I'm going with Cornell Powell. Okay, Kansas City. He had a 2nd-round grade. They got him in the 5th. Dude's got some size. He's 4.4 speed, and there's major opportunity there. It doesn't take a superstar for Pat Mahomes to make it look like a superstar. So Powell comes from a big-time organization, Clemson. He's produced at the college level. He runs good routes. He's got good hands. He gets the opportunity. Maybe it might take mid-season for him to really get into the rotation and get comfortable. But once he does, this is a guy that could potentially win you a fantasy championship next year down the stretch. That's my call.
That is a deep cut. I like it. And we got Patrick Mahomes had very, very high praise for rookie Cornell Powell. Who knows what that's worth this early in the game, but that's not that is one that's getting bookmarked in the head. I'm glad you brought something like that to the table. You're not going to get that from every show, guys. Trust me.
I have to throw some Nico love in there too, real quick. I feel I can't mention St. Brown without mentioning Nico, a guy who's 6'4" and ran a 4.4. Didn't he run a 4.40?
We'll get to some rookies here in a minute. Yeah. So let's save that for that one. But why don't you give me your favorite sleeper for 2021? It's redraft, any position, just has to be ADP of 10th round or later is what I'm looking for here.
Oh my gosh. 10th round or later. So we're talking 12-man probably.
Yeah, I would think of it in terms of a 12-man PPR team. Gosh. But I would say, depending on who you throw out, if you throw out Raheem Mostert, I'm going to go, well, that's not going to happen. But if you threw out JVN Hawkins, that would be okay, that's interesting. Right. But so you get the kind of vibe. And again, it can be any position.
Okay, so this is the one that I've been following and that I really like, and I'm curious. And there's an opportunity that just opened up with Jeff Wilson being injured. And you guys think I'm about to say Trey Sermon.
I think you're about to say Wayne Gallman.
Nope.
No.
Oh,
Elijah Mitchell.
Interesting. You're not the first person I've heard bring that up.
Okay. I love Elijah Mitchell, and you can get him super late. And if you happen to draft Trey Sermon earlier, I would handcuff Elijah Mitchell. Or if you're able to, if you get Raheem Mostert, if that's your guy and you think he's going to lead the back, I think if you're going into the San Francisco backfield and you're getting a guy, the handcuff you must have is Elijah Mitchell. I love the speed. I love the size. I mean, his pro day was off the charts. It was on par with some of the best pro days that we've seen in the last 10 years of any running back, period. He's a little bit undersized. I think he's probably around like 210. So he's not like as big, but man, he runs big. Like he is a playmaker, and he did it. You know, and a lot of people are going to say, well, he played it. I think he played it like Louisiana or something like that, some small school.
Yeah.
I watched some film. I watched some film of him running against Alabama, and he's putting dudes on their backs with stiff arms. So, I am curious to see what opportunity he might get and then what he might do with it. He's one of my guys.
I like that one a lot. And again, I would have to say, like, it's definitely not a common take, but you're not the first person to throw that name. And here's the other thing I'll say. I as a Niners fan, read some stuff up on the Niners, and like they took him because he fell to them. They were like not necessarily going to take him. I think they were going to look somewhere on defense. And like Elijah Mitchell was just sitting there, and they're just like, yeah, all right, he's the best player on the board. Let's just get this guy. So
yeah, I know people hate him in I know the 49ers backfield, and I know San Francisco is like has a history of running back by committee kind of thing, but they've also got a recent history of injuries and opportunities popping up for guys who, you know, like Jeff Wilson, who probably wouldn't have otherwise had that opportunity. So if he's a guy that gets the opportunity, I want to see how he capitalizes on it.
No, I like that a lot. Rob, who you got for me? Sleeper. And I'm thinking of putting it again like 10th round or later in ADP.
Well, I want to say I propped Mitchell up in a committee article a few weeks ago for San Francisco. I love him. He returns kicks too. The dude's going to make the roster. Wouldn't shock me at all. Well, probably would now, considering Wilson got hurt. Before Wilson's injury, I thought Mostert would get dealt, but he's probably safe for now. But yeah, Mitchell's going to make the team. And he's at some point. We see that Shanahan will play pretty much whoever he wants to play. So he'll play Mitchell at some point. I got a guy for you, Jalen Darden, played at North Texas.
Yeah.
He's gone to Tampa, so it's going to be a little bit of a deep dive for this guy, but he's huge hands. He's a big 50-50 catch guy. Take the ball from over top of you. He had 19 touchdowns last year and 12 in 2019. He returns kicks. He plays every receiver spot. Smart guy, runs good routes. He could be a Tom Brady favorite if he can get a chance to play. Now, like I said, there's a lot of guys in front of him, but if you're in a dynasty format and you got a chance to grab him for next to nothing and just stash him in 2-3 years down the road when Mike Evans is gone, this guy could slide into that Evans role and produce.
No, I've definitely heard some good things about Darden. I've even heard some like Tyler Tyler Johnson?
I like Tyler Johnson too.
I've heard some people going like Tyler Johnson maybe SOL because Darden's there. So I'm going to be really curious to keep an eye out on Darden as well. We've already talked about some rookies, so let's get into it. Rob, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Austin. Who are the top 3 rookies you are the most excited about for the 2021 class? You can be excited about them because of redraft or dynasty, best ball, whatever. Just your top 3 guys.
Jamar Chase, for obvious reasons.
Sure.
He's got the chemistry with Burrow. We all know that. The dude is the best receiver.
He's good.
Yeah, he's best receiver in the draft. He's already impressing in OTAs, so I'm very, very happy with Chase. Kenny Gainwell, I spoke of earlier. Love Kenny Gainwell, and I think 2 to 3 years down the road, he's going to be sort of the hybrid type. I can't pull the guy's name out of my head. Played for just retired. Played for Philly.
Darren Sproles.
Sproles. He could fill that Sproles role in 2 to 3 years. Like catch a lot of passes, get a lot of those bonus type touchdowns with the receiving. And I love Najee Harris. So
Okay.
I hate the Steelers, but I love Harris. I love the opportunity. I'm an SEC guy. He can catch passes. He's rarely going to come off the field, and there's no competition. So those are my top three.
Love it. And I love me some Najee Harris too. So 0 complaints over here. Austin, who you got? Top 3 again, can be redraft, dynasty, any format, just has to be a rookie. And who are you excited about this year?
Yep, for sure. So all those are great guys. And I was actually going to stay away from Najee and Chase. And I was going to go with obviously a lot of hype around Kyle Pitts. And I agree, first year, probably not going to get the most production you're going to get. But just because he's a tight end, why do we got to put him in that box? I mean, he has the potential to be flexed out wide and to do different things that a lot of tight ends don't really get the opportunity to do. So I'm really super high on him for that, and his athleticism and wingspan and all of those things that are well documented, well talked about. I believe in him. I'm a buyer. The only thing that scares me with him, I guess, is what's the future for Matt Ryan. But again, talent, opportunity, yeah. Give me all the Pitts shares that I can get. Other 2 guys I would go with are Javonte Williams. I think Javonte Williams this year, his stock may be a little bit capped just with Gordon being in town, but Gordon will be out of there after this season, and Javonte Williams will be one of the best running backs in this class. And I don't hate the team around him. I actually think his situation is pretty good when he steps in there.
Great if he didn't have Drew Lock at quarterback,
yeah,
and sure. Vic Fangio at head coach, if I'm being honest.
But the line's not terrible. Their roster
the Broncos
is
are
not
a
terrible.
Good team that will likely underperform how they should. That's where I see
they're just a couple of pieces away. So those are definitely 2 of my guys, and then I guess the third guy. Oh man, I'm gonna have to go with. Let me get some Bateman. I like Rashad Bateman being the number 1 wide receiver. He's been my guy. Nothing changed with his where he landed. I know a lot of people.
So you expect him to be the number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore, not Hollywood Brown?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And I'm from Oklahoma, and I've watched Hollywood for a long time.
I don't necessarily disagree with you either. I'm from the Baltimore area. I think Rashad Bateman's the number 1 wide receiver as well.
Yeah. No, Hollywood's great at getting separation. He's really super quick, and he's good in small spaces and things like that. But when you're looking for a number 1 wide receiver, that doesn't matter where you're at on the field, who's going to, he runs good. Bateman runs good routes. He's going to go get the ball. It doesn't matter. Red zone, anywhere you're at on the field, he should be a guy that you should be trying to get the ball in his hands. Give me all the Bateman I can get. In fact, 10-man today, I just got him at the 203. Can you believe that?
Ooh.
Yeah, crazy.
There's hope for me yet. I love Rashad Bateman. He was my wide receiver 4 in the class. I definitely don't mind the landing spot. I think Lamar will be a fairly accurate passer. I think he'll get him quality looks. We had Willie Snead be relevant at times, and you're telling me Rashad Bateman can't be. Let's be real here. And I agree with you. I think that he will be the wide receiver 1 on that team. I think they definitely wanted to go out and get a wide receiver, and I think the one that they wanted fell to them. I think they were expecting maybe to have to pick up a Kadarius Toney, and instead they got Bateman, who I think is significantly better. Okay, moves to be made. These are some guys I'm curious as your thoughts, and I know Austin has opinions on one of them. It's kind of why I wanted to put this in here. So I want to know, where do you think these players are going to end up starting week 1? First one, and Austin, I'll let you have the floor here. Julio Jones. Where do you think he's going to end up, and why is it Tennessee?
So, yeah, oh my gosh, what a perfect way to frame the question. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, it's not going to be Tennessee, so please stop. Their cap situation's horrible. The only way he ends up in Tennessee is if they make a major move and ship Ryan Tannehill out. That's not happening. So being in the salary cap leagues, and then this goes back to my first article I wrote about Jonnu. What's a good landing spot for Jonnu? And I had to look at the cap that the Titans were working with, and there were teams that obviously had more cap and they were better suited. And I thought that he would land in those places, and the Patriots were one of the teams that were on my list. And then that's where he inevitably went. But for Julio, he is not going to Tennessee. I've seen reports come out say, oh, he might go there. And then I've seen some kind of say, he's a long shot. Well, yeah, he's a long shot. There's no way the money works. So he won't be there. I think he'll stay in Atlanta. I think Atlanta is going to eat the money. It doesn't matter. Even if they could spread it out across 2 years, you're still paying a guy to not be on your team, and it's a bunch of money. So keep him on your team. Let him finish his career out in Atlanta. And then if he wants to move on after being 32, going on 33 years old, sure. But I don't see him going anywhere but Atlanta.
Rob, what about you? You think he's staying in Atlanta? You think he's going to Tennessee, who I think would actually have to genuinely shed a top player in order to bring him on? So it doesn't make a ton of sense. I would agree with Austin there. I looked at the cap. It's like, I get that he's boys with Derrick Henry. They've got to like get rid of someone big to make that happen. I don't see it happening. Do you think he's going to scare you and go to Baltimore and ruin all our Rashad Bateman hopes? I've heard some talk about that possibility. Where do you have Julio Jones going?
I think he's going to New England, and I think they're going to trade a second. And I
hate that.
They're going to trade N'Keal Harry, and they're going to trade Sony Michel, which will fill two big needs for Atlanta, for a receiver and a viable back and a second-round pick. And Atlanta could move on from both of these players within a year or two if they don't turn their careers around with them. And that puts New England potentially in the Super Bowl conversation, even with Cam Newton potentially throwing the ball or potentially throwing it over his head, even though I still think Mac Jones by Thanksgiving is the starter there. But I think that's probably the perfect fit, and they got the cap space, and if the evil emperor wants him, he'll get him.
I hate how much this makes sense.
I love that.
The N'Keal Harry and Sony Michel part like really puts it all together, because they can be gone from Atlanta's roster at the end of the season. Like, oh, that's gonna happen. That's a problem. All right, moving on to more pleasant things. Maybe. Who is Aaron Rodgers? Will he be the Jeopardy host? What team will he be on? Rob, we'll start with you this time. Where do you think Aaron Rodgers is going to end up playing football week 1 of 2021?
Well, I hope it's still football, because I watched his turn on Jeopardy, and while I enjoyed the fact that it's Aaron Rodgers, he was a little robotic, a little stiff. So, but I think he stays with Green Bay. I think he's just he's blustering now. He's trying to heavy hand the organization, and I don't think they'll do a Mike Brown sort of deal, and like he did with Carson Palmer, and trade him. Sure. I think they'll just be like, you play for us or you can retire. And hopefully, for the sake of the league and fantasy football, he stays in Green Bay.
Now, I'm curious if you're thinking that way. Do you think he ends up getting paid more money? Because I think if he stays in Green Bay, he'll either get paid more money or he's going to be allowed to leave like after a year.
Well, money always makes things better. Even when you got a ton of money already, a little bit extra always sort of sweetens the tea a little bit. So I think that maybe we'll bump him a little bit of cash, and he'll be a happy man.
All right, Austin, you're nodding your head in agreement. So do you think Aaron Rodgers will be playing in Green Bay?
Oh, man, it's going to be there or Denver. Denver's a team that's been rumored a lot. They have the cap space. We talked a little bit earlier about the roster and what it looks like, and they're maybe just a piece away, and maybe Aaron Rodgers is that piece. So I would not count them out. Anytime I hear rumors, I always look at like holistically, and I actually don't think this one is as far-fetched as like the Julio Jones rumor was, like going to Tennessee and all that, like all that chatter. So I think this is a possibility, but I would probably agree, if you had to put my feet to the fire with Rob, I think he probably stays in Green Bay, at least for one season, but I'm not willing to commit to anything more than that. I would say next season it's going to get even more interesting, and Aaron Rodgers might be on the move.
Yeah, I was talking with Thor Nystrom about this when I interviewed him, and I'm just like, I think if it was anywhere but Green Bay, I'd really be betting on him leaving. But Green Bay's front office has the benefit, well, at least to them, of a very conservative ownership group, in that their ownership is the fans. It's not one guy who on a whim is going to fire this general manager. That is a team that's been to the championship game 2 years in a row. That fan base believes in that team. They believe the team is more important than any individual. And I think they will actually, if this is Jerry Krause versus Michael Jordan, they might side with Jerry Krause. Like they might side with the GM. And so I think he will have the permission, so to speak, to not be forced to trade Aaron Rodgers. And then it comes down to, does Aaron Rodgers want to not play football, which maybe, but I kind of doubt it, especially because I think he more than ever wants a ring to prove that he really is as good as Brady. And if he just hadn't been mismanaged all this time, like look what he could do. And going to Denver would actually prove a lot about that. I always didn't buy the Denver thing just because I didn't believe that he wanted to live in Denver. That was like honestly my big thing. Like playing for Vic Fangio, is that like really like what Aaron Rodgers wants to do? On the other hand, that team's so damn talented, like him going there would make him a Super Bowl favorite, I think, for sure, at least from the AFC. So yeah, I would probably agree with you guys that Green Bay is the most likely landing spot. However, there's part of me that wants chaos and wants it to be the Raiders, where he has said he would go, where they could pay him a lot of money and where that team would still be a total crapshoot, even if he went there, and things would not be any better. And I am like so here for it. Moving on. Anthony Miller. Not a name you hear normally come up, but hey, we're nothing if not a sideways look at fantasy football over here at the Lateral. We all thought he was probably going to move around the draft. Like we're all kind of, I think, surprised that he's still on the Bears roster. Austin, I'm going to start with you. Where do you think Anthony Miller ends up in 2021? And do you think he will be fantasy relevant, which he's flirted with over the past 2 years?
Yeah, that's the key. So I don't have strong opinions on Anthony Miller per se. I mean, he's all right. He doesn't move the needle a whole bunch for me. We talked throughout this podcast about opportunity. So I think if he goes to a place where he could get, opportunity and be a number 2 wide receiver and then have a good quarterback, it would make a lot of sense. I don't know what the Texans cap situation looks like, or if that would be a good team for him.
A good spend it all on running backs, but
yeah, right.
Got any left over.
Yeah, so maybe in about 5 years they might bring him on when he's a little older. But I don't know, maybe a team like that, it might be, all right. Wouldn't like the Colts. Maybe the Colts could use somebody like that. But I don't really have strong opinions. And at the end of the day, wherever he goes, probably not on my radar unless he just lands in like a perfect spot.
Okay. I think Houston would be an interesting one, given in Houston, potentially the wide receiver room's wide open there. I mean, Brandon Cooks, I think, is still like a level ahead of everyone, even if Deshaun Watson leaves. But like that number 2 spot, I mean, we've seen flashes of talent from Anthony Miller. It's not impossible he could take it. Rob, what do you think? Where do you think Anthony Miller is going to end up to start 2021? And again, do you think he'll be fantasy relevant?
Well, how about this? The aforementioned Green Bay Packers sure could use a guy to take the top off of defense. Get a true deep threat, and a guy who's really flashed on occasion, even with terrible quarterback situation in Chicago. Miller is still flashed when he's been given the opportunity. He's totally out of favor with Nagy now, so he's done in Chicago. But you put him with an elite level quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, he could bust out this year. I don't think it's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, but that would be, to me, the best landing spot to rejuvenate his career and make him fantasy relevant.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen because I think the breakout Packers wide receiver that we're all overlooking is clearly Devin Funchess. But no, Anthony Miller to Green Bay. I like that. This is why I'm glad I brought it up, because that is a great answer. I'd love to will that into existence. I think it was odd that they drafted a wide receiver who can't take the top off of defenses, which is like exactly what they needed. It was odd. For me, it's like, I feel like he has to go somewhere else. On the other hand, how is he still in Chicago? Like, he's still there. I don't get why. Like, I got the impression they would have given him away for like Cubs tickets. Like, it seriously feels like they don't want him around at all, and yet he still remains on that roster. So I will be curious to see. I have to say, Green Bay, that is, I think, the best answer I've heard so far.
Let me just say, my daughter lives in Wrigleyville, so I would have taken those Cubs tickets for him.
Right? And that makes sense. Like, Cubs tickets for Anthony Miller. Like,
very fun part of town, yes.
All right. Well, another guy who surprisingly, though not quite as much, still on a roster is Zach Ertz. Do we think he stays in Philly? I think unlikely. But where, if he's not going to stay in Philly, do we think he goes? Rob, we'll start with you. Where do you think Zach Ertz starts 2021?
Raising my hand and giving up Facebook prayers for the Cincinnati Bengals. There's been some local buzz, and there's definitely a need. CJ Uzomah is coming off a torn Achilles, and let's face it, he wasn't the most nimble fella to start with.
No.
So Ertz could bring a stable pass-catching presence, veteran presence, safety net for a guy who's going to sorely need a safety net in Joe Burrow. If we could get Ertz and get him on a 1 or 2 year deal, that would be perfect.
Okay, so curious. Are you more on board with that if it's going to be a release and sign, or are you willing for the Bengals to trade something to get Ertz?
Well, I know Mike Brown, and I know this team, and I know they're not going to trade anything tangible to get
That's
him.
true.
Yeah, it would be draft capital, and it probably wouldn't be high draft capital.
Yeah,
that's why I don't think it will happen.
Sure,
but if we as the fan base could have a vote, then I would vote to trade something for him.
Okay, I like that. Austin, where you got Zach Ertz going? Why is it the Colts?
Oh man, nope, not the Colts. So there's a few teams that I had on my list when I was looking at Jonnu, and where he might go, who didn't ever really fill a need. How about the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Interesting.
Should still have a ton of cap space.
So you're saying Tim Tebow is not their answer at tight end?
I don't know if Tim Tebow makes the 53 man. I mean, good for him if he does. Like maybe, possibly.
I would bet on him not making the 53 man. I think I said this on a tweet a couple weeks ago. I think Kelvin Benjamin is more likely to play a snap at tight end in 2021 than Tim Tebow is, and I kind of stand by it.
Yeah, I'll give the guy credit though. He's kept his body in phenomenal shape. But
everyone knew he was a great athlete. That's not the question.
I mean, have you seen the guy lately? He's jacked.
He's great. He tried to play professional baseball. He's a great athlete.
Yeah, but no, I think there's a need there in Jacksonville. Luke Farrell was drafted there, but he's not really a pass catcher. He's a fantastic blocking tight end, and maybe he could surprise us. But I think outside of him, they have O'Shaughnessy. Doesn't really move the needle a whole lot for me. But Zach Ertz, getting the ball thrown to him there would be amazing. So that would probably be my number one team. And then, of course, there's a couple others that, he might fit in. Arizona doesn't have a tight end, some other places. So I think that Jacksonville would be my number one spot.
Okay. I like that. That does feel like an Urban Meyer move, going in and getting a vet like that. All right. This is going to be the final question before we wrap things up here. Rob, start with you, then I'll go to Austin. How likely do you think it is that he ends up at the Buffalo Bills? Because I think that is my leading favorite. I joked about the Colts because Colts love a good tight end. He'd have the connection with Wentz and with Reich, but it feels too perfect. The Bills didn't fix tight end really through the draft. They don't seem to be in love with Dawson Knox. It seems like a position they've wanted to address. And they were linked to Jonnu with kind of buzz, but never anything tangible. Rob, do you think Zach Ertz could end up on the Buffalo Bills? Rate it on a scale of 1 being not happening to 10 being it's a lock.
I'm going to go 2. They I wrote this guy up a couple of months ago. The Jacob Hollister. They signed him in free agency.
Okay.
He flashed on occasion in Seattle. And he is 50%. Dawson Knox is 50%. Get them wet, smush them together.
Sure.
You got 100% of a tight end there without having to spend a whole bunch of money or trade draft capital or whatever for an aging veteran who's going to go to the Bengals like Zach Ertz.
It's a good answer. I like it. Hollister definitely has flashed on occasion. That is an interesting one. And again, that's a team that I think if you looked at them objectively, tight end issues aren't why they didn't make it to the Super Bowl. So, you could be onto something there. Austin, what about you, though? I saw a little glint in your eye when I mentioned the Bills.
Yeah, that's really funny. So I'll give you my list of teams for when we were talking about, I did my article on Jonnu. Number 1 was the Chargers. They filled that need sort of with
Jared Cook.
He's really old, but I think he's serviceable enough that they're probably not in the market anymore for a tight end.
I would agree.
Number 2 was the Jacksonville Jaguars, probably more so from a cap standpoint, but also just like a roster standpoint too.
Sure.
Number 3 on my list was the Buffalo Bills. But on all the 5 teams on my list, they were the ones with the least amount of cap. So for me, I would probably set probably a little higher than a 2. It's definitely intriguing to me. I would like to see him there. I would like to see, as many weapons as Josh Allen can get himself, the better. And so Dawson Knox, not it. So yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing him go there. I just don't know that, again, the money. I don't know that the money works. If they can find a way, I would not count that out as a possibility though.
Well, this is why we bring you guys on, to give some extra point of views on things such as where Zach Ertz going to go and who's going to break out, who's going to be the sleepers to get, what rookies you've got to pay attention for in 2021. And Austin, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to go to you first here. Please plug your upcoming content. Where can the good people find you?
Yeah, so obviously I write for Dynasty Nerds. You can watch out for some of my articles. You can follow me on Twitter. I will share those there. It's at Dynasty Nerd 101. That's my Twitter handle. You can find me there. That's where I post most of my content. I don't really venture out too much on any other social platforms from there. I do have some upcoming content with Dynasty Nerds. We're fixing to do our 32 teams in 32 days. I'll be covering the Kansas City Chiefs offense, and I'll be also covering a defense that I'm really intrigued by, the New York Giants. I think they got some good pieces on their defense. I think they'll be a much improved defense. They were already pretty good, but I think they're going to surprise some people this year on the defensive side of the ball. So I will be plugging those articles pretty soon. They'll come out on my Twitter probably in the next month and a half or so. So definitely keep following for that. Love it.
Love it. Rob, thank you so much for coming on as well. It's truly been a blast. Love the Bengals homerism. It's such a breath of fresh air. Where can the good people find you? Why don't you go ahead and plug some stuff for us?
Well, I can be found on Twitter at RobMattox2. That is 2 because my one Twitter account is all political, and I had to shut that down because it just makes me angry. I can also follow my friends over at the Fantasy Coaches. Steven does good work over there. They got podcasts. I have some content on that platform, and as being the off season and working full-time jobs aside of this, content sporadic. So I do what I can. Also at Hail Mary Football, my buddy Lee over there got good analytical stuff. He's really good with the numbers. That's one, not my strong suit. And also at Yards Per Fantasy, download the app, check it out. It's a great site, great insight, great bunch of guys over there. So check it out. And I'll be adding more and more and more as the season gets closer.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. And as always, it is I, your host, Mick Lateral, a.k.a. at McLateralFF on the Twitter. You can find me there. You can find me on thelateralff.com, where we post our written content. I'm hoping to have something written here soon, but right now I am working on my way too early redraft rankings. QBs are done. RBs, I think I've got 1 through 26. I'm starting to work on some wide receivers while I think out the RBs a little more. Antonio Gibson's turf toe is admittedly scaring me a little. Not a ton. He'll probably still be top 16, but will he be top 14 like I currently have? Time will tell. And then the big thing for the Lateral coming up is we are going to launch the Lateral Show. Our flagship podcast is going to record on Tuesdays. It is going to drop on Wednesdays. It's going to be available on Spotify for sure, but we do believe it's also going to be available, again, wherever podcasts are sold. Is that really a thing for podcasts? Who knows? But what I do know is if you send a redraft question to thelateralff@gmail.com or drop it in my DM or drop it in the blog pages DM, we will be giving away a Scott Fishbowl 11 spot. You don't want to miss out on that. So send us a question. It's got to be redraft. And we will pick a winner from our mailbag for the inaugural The Lateral Show. And someone will be getting a Scott Fishbowl 11 spot. Cannot wait. It's going to be a blast. But not as much as a blast as having you two on today was. Again, thank you so much for coming on. And I think with that, we are out.